Good evening and welcome to the first London Textile Month 2025 online talk. This is part of a citywide month-long textile festival. I'm Polly Leonard. I'm the founder and editor of Selvedge magazine, and I will be your host for this event. It's inspiring to see so many of you here with us today from near and far. Our online talks extend our reach across the world, as many of you would not have been able to attend had this been a live event in London. We are especially grateful that you have taken time out of your day to join us. And I hope you enjoy the presentation and are inspired to join the conversation. Housekeeping first. Please bear with us if you experience any technical problems. We will get back to you as soon as possible. The event will be recorded and the recording sent to you within the next 7 days. If you have any questions during our presentation, please add them to the chat and I will endeavour to put most, if not all, of your questions to our speakers during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. I predict the entire event will run for around an hour, and we will do our very best to finish around 7 p.m. May I request that our speakers share their websites and social media handles in the chat and ask our audience to support their wonderful work by following them on social media. I also ask our audience to share any resources that other members of our community may find useful. Next slide, please. The art of the trademark in Indo-British Textile Trade. This evening, we invite you to join into the bustle of the markets of 19th and early 20th century India. Here, buying cloth wasn't just about the fabric. It was also about the images pasted onto each bolt. These multicolored labels, known as textile tickets, turned trade into theatre. A dancing elephant, a reclining woman in a garden, a beloved deity, or a gleaming steamship. These early mass-produced advertisements conjured laughter, longing, devotion, and dreams, shaping the value and meaning of cloth far beyond the weave itself. Next slide, please. To explore this vivid history, we're joined by Shrey Maurya and Rashna Shetty from the MAP Academy, an online platform that encourages greater engagement with South Asian art and cultural histories. Shrey is the research director of the MAP Academy. She helped set up the MAP Academy's Encyclopedia of Art and leads special projects, overseeing its research and editorial direction. She is also the editor of the publication related to this talk, Ticket Tika Chaap, the art of the trademark in Indo-British Textile Trade. Rashna is a research specialist at MAP Academy. She draws upon her background in museology and her passion for folk and popular culture to reveal how these everyday images still carry meaning, connecting past marketplaces with the way we read and value images today. Rashna also works at the MAP Academy special projects, focusing on research and writing. Together, they'll show us how simple cloth labels open up a much bigger story of art, memory, commerce, and desire. Welcome, Shrey and Rashna. If you could stop sharing your screen, Rashna and Rashna, if you could share your screen.
Sure. Thank you, Polly. Thank you very much.
Welcome to Selvedge. We can now see your screen. It's looking great.
All right.
I will turn off my video and my audio, and if you start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Polly. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this talk. I'm very happy to be here with you today. Echoing Polly's introductory statement, I'd like to use this photograph on the left to invite you into a scene. Imagine it is the early 19th or 20th century. You're in an Indian bazaar. This is what it looks like. It's full of people. It's the clamor of traders surrounds you. There's smells and colors around you. You are here to buy fabric to make a new set of clothes. And before you is a wide array of cotton cloths. You see it in shops, folded and placed in rows. But on each packaged cloth, you see one little detail that inevitably catches your eye. It's this glossy, multicolored paper label, just like the one you see this trader displaying. These are almost postcard size. They are affixed to almost every length, and they're almost entirely unmissable. In fact, cloth is sometimes arranged to display it. And the images on these little labels are what draw you in. One features an elephant, another has a god you recognize, another has a scene of a man and a woman caught up in a reverie of love. And these images are fantastic. These little paper stickers are known as textile tickets, although they've also variously been known as shippers' tickets, textile or cotton marks, and in local parlance, tika or chap, which comes from the word chapna, from the Hindi word chapna, to stick. And these labels arrived in the thousands in India, and they arrived on millions of packed yards of both British and Indian made cotton fabric, but importantly, fabric that was milled using machines. These paper labels, which for a while suffused the market, they were many things at once. Sure, they were a beautiful image, but they were also legally registered trademarks. They were advertisements, and scholars think that perhaps they may have been the earliest form of branding that you see in the Indian market. Similar paper labels traveled on British milled cloth from Britain to other parts of Asia, Africa, South America, nearly everywhere that the textile trade made its way to, and it was pretty much global. And these tickets were produced for a large part of the later 19th century and a part of the early 20th century, and they sort of then disappeared. But as you will see, I hope in this talk, they didn't disappear entirely. And some of the ideas that they held in them, some of the imagery you see, some of the colors, some of the designs, some of the very core ideas that we hope to introduce in this talk, they sort of remain with us forever in the way advertisement and marketing happens even today. But let us look at how these paper labels arrived. So, as you might have heard me say, they arrived stuck on paper, they arrived stuck on packages of cloth. When cloth arrived in the markets, it didn't arrive in a roll, and it didn't typically arrive in the form of fully formed garments. Rather, at this point, cloth was sold in pre-cut packages. You got 60 yards, you got 40 yards, you got 10 yards, you got 20 yards. You'd go to a shop and you would pick up a pre-packed length of cloth. Typically, this length of cloth would have been folded um, in a manner that formed a rectangular package. And on that very last fold, that is the last fold, which becomes the uppermost fold of the cloth, you would see all of these markings. So you would see a stuck ticket, you would see perhaps some stamped markings, and all of this information together told you the kind of cloth you were getting, what dye had been used in it, some of its registration data, the name of the merchant, the yardage, and so on. And all of the stamp markings were in water-soluble ink. The label you could peel off, and then wonderfully, you could also save it because, after all, it was a pretty image. This is how the common buyer encountered labels in the market. And we know from the sheer volume of labels left behind and from other design ephemera and paperwork that we have today, we know that such labels, uh, at one particular point in time, they were on nearly every length of cloth that arrived in India. Let's look at what a label is made of. Typically, a textile label would be, say, postcard sized. It would either be in portrait mode or it would be in landscape mode. It would have a gorgeous central visual, very detailed, very beautifully created, always very attractive. For one reason or another, it would be attractive. And we'll look at what makes that central visual attractive in a while. But a ticket would always have a central visual framed often by this little frame, and the frame would have text on it. And this text would include the name of the merchant or the agent selling this cloth, the names of the markets in which these traders operated, and you would have this in different languages. You had it in English and you had it in regional languages. And always hidden somewhere in this little slip of paper would be a tiny, teeny, tiny number, often almost unnoticeable, but that number is very important. Here you see it in this little right-hand corner, and that is the trademark number of this particular good that this label is attached to. And as we'll see, each of these labels show they're beautiful, but they're also very important documents containing this little, very tiny hidden number. This is what nearly unanimously across all textile labels that we see from this period, this almost seems the formula that all labels use. There's a frame, there's information in the frame, and there's a very gorgeously executed central image. They're all very bright, very deep colors. And you can tell a lot of thought and intention has gone into how each of these are made. I want you to step away from the market and ask yourself, where is all of this milled cloth coming from? And we're talking about cloth, but where is it coming from? Well, you see, between around the late 18th century and in the early 19th century, a great churn was happening, and particularly in Britain. The Industrial Revolution was underway. And one of the first processes to be impacted deeply by industrialization and the introduction of machines into manufacturing was the cotton industry. And suddenly, cotton yarn could be processed with machines. Yarn could be woven into cloth using machine, and all of this, along with developments in engineering and transport and energy production, what we know broadly as the Industrial Revolution, we see the first effects of the Industrial Revolution in England, where mills spring up all around England, across the country. There are little mills springing up, and in these mills, there is mechanized production of cloth happening. And because at this point, Britain, of course, empire is at its peak, and it has great naval might and it has great trade might. It's able to bring in a lot of raw cotton from around the world, including from enslaved um, including cotton that enslaved workers are picking in America. They bring all this cotton into England, and in the mills, machines are converting it into yarn, and machines are converting it into fabric. And so suddenly, Britain's fabric output just sort of goes up. There's a meteoric rise in the amount of cotton cloth being produced. And because of this, there is competitive pricing, which means that a lot of traders are now vying to take this cloth and sell it all around the world. And so, in the time that we are in, Britain has established itself as the leading manufacturer of cotton goods. And interestingly, India, which is also its prized colony, which is also its little gem in its crown, India becomes its largest market. And bear in mind, until this point, that India is one of the largest cotton textile. Historically, it's been a great textile exporter, but it is now at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, that it sort of flips, and Britain becomes the great exporter of cotton, and India, of course, becomes one of its markets. But our story begins, as you will see from this red text, our story begins in Manchester. So here you see all the mills around Manchester, and it is from these mills that cotton arrives in Manchester, and Manchester becomes the hub of this trade, and it's given a name. It's called Cottonopolis. That's how much cotton is passing through Manchester. In Manchester, so much cotton is being traded that special warehouses are built to hold this cotton cloth, inspect it, look at it, cut it up into yardage, and package it before it's sent down to the docks and shipped off into other parts of the world. And in these very specialized warehouses, cotton cloth is cut. As you can see on the photograph top left, stamp markings are applied, and then with hydraulic presses, these packages are compressed into these very neat little bales that are wrapped with weatherproof material. Iron bands are attached to secure it, and it becomes this nice, chunky, rectangular package full of cloth, which is ready to then make its voyage out into the world. But because Manchester has so much cotton passing through it, it's not just important to the cotton trade, it is also important, it becomes an important center for textile tickets. But how do we go from selling cloth to attaching tickets on them? Why do these tickets exist in the first place? And these tickets, as their widespread nature tells us, they're very essential to the trade. You don't see cotton packages going out without these labels. Well, interestingly, all of this can be traced back to an act that is passed in 1875. And this is the British Trademarks Registration Act of 1875. And the act states that manufacturers and traders across empire, across any of the empire's territories, if they want to safeguard their goods, if they want to say that they sell a unique product, if they want legal protection for their goods, they need to register a trademark, a trademark, a trade symbol. What is a trademark? They say that the act says rather, that the trademark must consist of a unique symbol, and the symbol can be composed of a word, an image, or a combination of the two, which needs to be applied to the commodity or attached to the commodity in some way. And that will tell the consumer that you are consuming a product associated with this particular unique symbol, right? Today we know these as trademarks. Because cotton is one of the goods being traded, of course, cotton falls under this act. It is one of the traded goods listed under the act. And so now all of the many players who are vying to sell cotton across empires, holdings, and in the world, they have to begin registering their cotton, their product. And each kind of cloth, each kind of printed cloth, each kind of plain cloth, if you want to sell it, and if you want to protect it in the market, you have to register a unique word, a symbol. And it is in response to this act largely that the traders and agents begin going to the registration office and registering little symbols. But very quickly, and this is something we surmise from research, very quickly they would have run out of the very simple designs. And as more and more traders are running to the patent office, to the trademark office, to trademark new designs, and the office says, well, your design already exists, find a new one. And they say, well, I haven't got one. And they say, well, no, go find one. And so there's this mad dash to produce newer and more unique symbols. And in response to that requirement, an entire industry of designers, artists, and printers emerge in Manchester. B. Taylor and Co., whose building you see here, is one such premise. In fact, this little printing and design making industry, rather complex, is so required and so in demand that they begin advertising it. So by the beginning of the 1900s, by the beginning I would say by the end of the 19th century, rather, you have printing establishments like B. Taylor advertising themselves as ticket printers, as you see written on the building here. This is why textile tickets come into existence. And these printing establishments say to traders, wait a minute, we won't just give you a unique idea. You tell us what sort of audience you have. You tell us where you want to sell your product. We will give you an image that you we can discuss what image you'd like, and we will take that image. We will in fact go to the registration office. We will apply for the trademark. We'll manage all of that. Don't worry. And guess what? We will also print it for you. It's an all-in-one operation that springs up. And we know that B. Taylor & Co. is one such establishment that offers this, as we can see from the documents we have from these establishments. As you can see in these two particularly. On the left, you have a ticket and an application form sent to the trademark office. This is from, if I'm not mistaken, 1924, requesting this trademark for a particular trader. And on the right, you see something more interesting. You see that this is a letter written by B. Taylor & Co., written to B. Taylor & Co. from a man who is an expert in Gujarati. Gujarati is the script you see here. And he writes back to B. Taylor & Co. saying, I got your letter, I heard your query, and knowing this language, I can tell you this much, that this ticket is called Gulbakavli. And here's what it means in Gujarati. So we know that printing establishments are very involved in the process. They figure out what traders want them to say. They print in different languages, and all of this is happening in Manchester. You look at these tickets and they're very beautiful, and you ask yourself, how were they producing these? They're very gorgeous, very deeply detailed. Coincidentally, and at this time, also because of the industrialization and an increase in mechanization and a evolution in technologies, a new style of printing is taking off at roughly the same time that the cotton market is seeing its boom and the Trademark Act is passed, right? And that is chromolithography. Lithography is a printing technique that exists. It allows for mass printing, but not so much mass printing in color. When chromolithography is invented, what it allows is not simply mass printing, it allows you to also mass print in color. And very quickly, chromolithography is adopted by printing presses around the world, and consequently, the world also sees a printing boom, which I will come back to in a little bit, because the printing presses are making printing easier, they're cheaper, it makes prints more affordable, and suddenly prints start to suffuse the market. It has an impact, of course, on the publishing world, but of course, it has an impact on the production of these sort of prints, on trademarks and labels that you affix to goods. And the chromolithography studio is one where artists, designers, and printers have to collaborate very deeply to take an original painting, break it down into layers of color, transpose them into metal plates, like you see this gray plate in the center of my screen. You break down the layers, you create multiple plates, you apply specific colors to each plate, so that when each plate is then applied onto a single sheet of paper, plate after plate after plate, color after color after color is layered onto a paper, you get a very complex colored design. It's in the way that the inks interact and the way that the colors interact that you're able to create such nuanced, detailed imagery. And because this is a very quick process, it picks up, and amongst the many industries that take up chromolithography, the textile ticket printing industry is one of these. What chromolithography also allows is a great mixing and matching. Remember, these are modern, almost modern printing studios where machines are at work. Sure, human hands are at work, but machines are doing a lot of the, machines help them enlarge an image, compress an image. It allows for very accurate transfer. And so you can take one particular icon and use its outline plate to create one ticket. You can use multiple layers and create a separate ticket. And so it allows for a great amount of innovation and mixing and matching and a great amount of color variation to happen. But where are these designs coming from, right? And as you will see through this presentation, and as we saw from close to 7,000 tickets that we studied for this project, we realized that we're seeing a wealth of imagery, and a lot of the imagery is, first of all, unique. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of familiar imagery. And we started picking out these familiar images, and we started thinking about where we had seen them, and a very interesting thing emerges. Textile tickets are borrowing very, very liberally from the visual culture of the world around them. In fact, we see that textile tickets are doing pretty accurate representations of miniature paintings. You see on the top left, one of a 17th century miniature painting from the Deccan in India is replicated nearly exactly. It's almost an exact match in this textile ticket for Graham in Manchester. On the right, you see a page from a Ramcharitmanas manuscript that is produced in 1814 in Benares. And you see, again, a near perfect replica on a ticket. We see other instances of imagery being copied, not just from Indian sources, but elsewhere. On the left is a 1908 painting by the American painter Maxfield Parrish. Look at the composition of it and the ticket to the right. Well, it seems that the artist has taken the composition, has taken the bare bones of it, and redone it, sort of Indianized it, redone the characters, given them new clothes, turned them into Indian women. But clearly, it's a copy of this original work. Or you see the one on the right. On the left is an illustration for a book of poems called Garden of Karma from 1901. A lady bends over a young boy. And on the right, you see an artist has taken the exact drawing and turned it into Krishna, the Hindu god Krishna, as a child, with his mother sort of gently folded over him. And you know that the images like this tell us that in the studio, first of all, somebody's sourcing these images, very carefully choosing them. Second, a team of artists or an artist is taking the time to convert it into something that seemingly will have an appeal for a certain kind of audience. And third, there is no attention to detail that is spared. It's very beautifully done. You see the shadows of the lanterns on the left, you see them recreated beautifully on the right. You see the diaphanous garment on the left, you see it recreated in the right. And it tells you that there are very skilled people working in the studio. You have more examples of these, of course. On the left is a cartoon that appears in Punch magazine in 1862. On the right, you have a ticket that is, again, near identical. On the left, you have very iconic illustration by Walter Crane, who is prodigious in his output, of course, and this is produced sometime in the late 19th century. And on the right, you have a ticket that seems to be a direct copy of it. So we see the tickets are, of course, pulling from a range of sources. And what this tells us is that these are very thought through choices that somebody is sitting and making, whether it is the agent who is selling the product and who knows what their customer will like to see, whether it is somebody in the studio who knows or has been informed of the dress and mannerisms of a certain place, or whether it's somebody who has language skills enough to translate the English into Bengali and Urdu and Gujarati and Tamil and all these other languages that appear on textile tickets. It's a very intentional process that we are seeing. As researchers, whilst looking through these images, the most overwhelming and the most immediately apparent set of imagery, of course, is to do with empire. We can't escape the fact that these tickets are circulating at a time when empire is at its peak. And the symbols of empire, whether it's the Union Jack, whether it's Britannia, whether it's the king, whether it's members of the royal family, these are very familiar symbols because peoples of Britain's colony have been seeing these symbols for some time, and they know that these symbols represent their political overlords. They know that these symbols represent Britain. So a great amount of British symbols, British imperial symbols appear on these textile tickets. And of course they would, because at this time there is the general idea in British colonial territories is that, and this is something that has been pushed on the people of the lands, is that the empire is superior. And so when you attach such symbols of superiority to your product, you naturally lend them a tinge of superiority. Often you see tickets make very explicit references to the fact that they come from England. They come from very far away. It's a constantly reinforced idea. And in these tickets, not only is the purchaser reminded that, this comes from a mill in England, they're also reminded that England is very far away. It's come a far distance. So see, this is a precious product. And not only is it precious, it comes from a place that you equate with better. And so there is ticket designers and perhaps ticket agents lean quite heavily on imperial symbols, and these would have been very recognizable in the marketplace. What else do we see on textile tickets? It is unmissable. The number of gods you see on textile tickets, it's simply too many. You have all the avatars of Krishna appearing, multiple forms of Shiva. You see gods depicted in the North Indian visual style. You see gods depicted in the East Indian visual style. You see gods depicted in the South Indian visual style. So what is happening is that even in India, as we discussed, there is a print revolution underway. We see that in India too, personal worship is slowly being transformed as printing presses are churning out images of gods. And there is a very high chance that these same images are circulating not just in India as prints, but also in Europe and in rest of the world. And we know that is true because we look at some of these god tickets and they are directly inspired by prints from colonial India. For example, the Shiva that you see in the top row at the extreme left is the exact copy of a print by the Calcutta Art Studio sometime in the 1800s. But the fact that such imagery is being printed, is being, first of all, sourced by designers in Manchester and then reproduced so faithfully and circulating so much and making up such a large corpus of textile tickets tells us that they're very aware of the intent that such tickets would have had on the viewer. Such recognizable symbols from mythology, from God, from very common acts of worship would have not only been recognizable, they would also have lent a degree of auspiciousness, a degree of blessedness to the product that they came attached with. And so a consumer in the market would look at it and see a god and feel devotion, or see a god and feel like, a god has vetted the product, and they would be more inclined to pick it up. Or they would simply perhaps want the sticker, peel it off and take it home and save it and worship it, as we know that a lot of people did with these textile tickets. So you see a great corpus of godly images. And very attached to these ideas of gods and tradition and culture is also, you see culture adjacent ideas appearing in textile tickets, culture and tradition adjacent ideas appearing in tickets. We see, for example, a lot of women on tickets, but interestingly, we see a lot of idealized versions of women. Of course, this is a changing world. India is changing, is undergoing some form of modernization. Women are emerging from more traditional roles. They are being educated in schools, they are reading books, they are part of public life. But alongside, there is also the idea of the traditional woman, a very recognizable idea of the good housewife, of the demure woman who looks after herself, who attends to her toilet, a woman who is devout, a woman who is interested in the arts, the perfect woman, the idealized woman. And these two are symbols that are very familiar to the Indian audience, right? Because these are direct reflections of how women are both expected to be in society and how women are coming to live their lives in society. So as you would have seen from the last two slides at least, a lot of these textile labels are playing to the idea of familiarity, to the idea of recognizability, to the idea of instant recognition, and also to the idea of sort of um, tradition and mythology and a shared understanding of cultural values. Um, along similar lines, along the lines of appealing to nostalgia and familiarity, you see a lot of these images. Now, on first glance, they seem to be a familiar image of a landscape or a familiar image of two dancing girls, or different headgear of different people. But what is also interesting about these sorts of images that we see of these familiar places and sites and very recognizably Indian scenes, if we were to do a deeper reading at it, we see that these images too are coming are directly copied from an originally circulating set of images already. um, what is happening in the 18th and 19th centuries, especially in the 19th century, is that India is being extensively photographed, documented, studied, for administrative and political purposes. A great number of photo albums of types of people, of views of India, of types of buildings are being produced to aid the company first and later the crown to better understand the Indian subcontinent, and to better understand and classify its people. Now, of course, such photographs and such images would have circulated in Europe, and they are circulating at this time popularly, of course, as postcards. So you see this image on the top left of the Ghats of Benares, for example, commonly appears in postcards from the time, or this one of the dancing ladies, again very commonly appearing. The image, the label on the right with the six heads, it comes from a very common trope of types of people. And these sorts of almost ethnographic imagery that is creating a sort of othered view of India, a rather picturesque but othered colonial understanding of India. These images are circulating in Britain, in Europe, and they would have definitely made their way into the studios of Manchester. So when at the studios of Manchester, traders and agents are wondering, what images of India would be recognizable to Indians? What would be a comforting and familiar image? They take the same images that are being made of India. So you see a sort of circular viewing of the Indian landscape, of the Indian people, a sort of replication of it across media. And textile labels are one of those media. Another set of interesting images you see is a reference to rulers. Now, this is quite interesting also because you can directly correlate it to the very interesting political ferment that is happening in colonial India. On the one hand, as colonial India struggles to find its own inherent identity as a nation, it is increasingly looking back to its history, to rulers of its past, um, as icons, as heroes, as um, almost deified heroes. So you have great kings from history like Shivaji, or more recent kings like Tipu Sultan, or the last Mughal emperor. You see them on the right. These figures, these historic figures, become almost heroes in the imagination of colonial India because they symbolize the country and kingdoms that are able to govern themselves. Simultaneously, erstwhile princely rulers are also sort of staking their claim on royalty. Photography, which has just entered the Indian subcontinent and is flourishing there, is quickly, of course, adopted by contemporary rulers who have their likeness made and distributed. All of this imagery of Indian rulers and ideas of Indian royal life, which have certain political connotations and meanings for the Indian viewers, these images are circulating not simply in India, they too are circulating in Europe and in America, and of course in Britain. And these images, of course, are also familiar images. And so they too make their way into textile ticket design. Because, for example, if a trader wants to sell his cloth in in Baroda, he is going to use an image of the king of Baroda, as we see on the top left. The Gaikwar of Baroda, he's an immensely popular figure. So if he wants to sell his cotton cloth, he's going to attach the image of a popular ruler. Or if somebody wants to have somebody buy their cloth because they feel a certain sort of allegiance to um, a beautiful historic past, they will attach an image of Tipu Sultan, who by now has become a hero. So you see a lot of images of royalty. But as much as the old and the familiar and the traditional and things with instant recall are exciting, Modernity is exciting. Newness is interesting. Newness also sells. Newness holds connotation of the future, of a newer future, of a future full of possibilities. And bear in mind, the world is changing. Motor vehicles are coming in. Electricity is a thing. Factories, of course, symbolize this new world. And we see a lot of symbols of modernity making their way into textile label design. They go from, you see images of radiators and fans and double decker buses and steamships and aeroplanes. I'm sorry I couldn't fit an aeroplane in here. But you have lots of tickets of aeroplanes, of machinery. Um, Interestingly, you also have images of the new middle class who is making its wealth through factories, as you will see in the ticket at the bottom left, which belongs to Agha Reza and Co., based in Manchester, which shows a mill at the bottom, um, a mechanized printing press, a textile printing press on the left, and on the right, you see a lady posing with a weaving machine. And in the center, you see this very successful businessman who has decided to place himself on the sticker because he symbolizes a new wealth. And with imagery such as this, what we can read is that with the use of such symbols of newness, of modernity, of excitement, traders are hoping that by attaching these symbols to their product, they're also inviting the viewer to pick up a product that promises newness, excellence that comes with newness, promises of modernity, promises of um, a more seamless life, of an interesting new world. It's inviting them to be a part of this modernity by buying a product branded with this modernity. And of course, as much as you see women fulfilling traditional roles, of course, the world is changing for women too, as it is in India, as it is around the world. And we see changes in the way women live their lives. We see that reflected in textile tickets too, where on the one hand, you have tickets of the ideal housewife, you also have the working woman, you have a woman at the printing press, you have women in short hair, you have fashionable women. So the idea of the new is as present in the imagery as the idea of the old and the comfortable. But last, and I think my favorite section, and I think you will all agree with me, nothing sells a product, I think, more than romance and magic and a certain fantastical quality you associate with it. Um, and we see that a great amount of textile tickets use imagery that invites you into sort of these magical worlds, these wonderful worlds where wonderful things are happening. You can watch little people dance under a full moon. You have little fairies bringing you baskets of flowers. It invites you to dream, fall into a nap and dream of a loved one, dream of a beautiful woman. It invites you into a world of leisure and a world of possibilities and romance. And you see a lot of these imagery. And what is interesting about these imagery, I mean, clearly you look at these and you say, wow, where is this imagery coming from? Interestingly, this imagery is coming is also actually a direct result of the print boom that is underway. When mechanized printing revolutionizes the printing industry, it means that a great number of illustrated books are being produced. A lot of illustrated folk tales and magic tales and storybooks are being produced. And a lot of the ticket designs that we see are actually directly derived from from illustrations for certain stories. We know that is the case with this reclining, almost mermaid-like lady. That's from a play called Ratnavali. We know that that is the case for the ones on the bottom too, and so on. Along with, of course, invitations into wonderful worlds, tickets also invite you into imagining a world of leisure, by attaching ideas of leisure and pleasure and joy to your product. And these are very conscious choices that these ticket makers are making when they choose these designs. They know that their product and this little label on it will offer their buyer perhaps a little moment of dream, a little moment of escape, and therefore will make their product attractive. And so we have seen a broad spectrum of the ideas that seem to suffuse the images that are used to sell a product. You have ideas of the familiar and the old and the nostalgic. You have ideas of newness. You have ideas of romance and sexuality and beauty and magic. And you have political undertones, of course. And a lot of this politics is, I think, clearest when you look at this set of tickets. It almost seems counterintuitive that British merchants are using nationalist imagery to sell cloth. But at the end of the day, whether they are British mills or Indian mills, whether they are British selling agents or Indian selling agents, I think these tickets tell us that they're very astute businessmen, and they're very perceptive, and they're very in touch with the current events, and they know that India is going through its own internal sort of coming of age as a nation and finding its own identity. Bharat Mata, or Mother India, is taking form at this time in India. And interestingly, they are not loath to use images of Bharat Mata. So even though this imagery completely antithetical and completely anti the empire's might, very much pro-nationalist imagery is circulating in India, in newspapers, in magazines, in prints, it also makes its way into the workshops of Manchester, where this imagery is being taken into the trademark office. It's unique, it's a complicated image. They granted a trademark, and it's in turn used to attach certain value to cloth and then sell more milled cloths. And all of this that is happening with textile labels in the Indian context is happening in markets around the world. You think they're paying attention just to the Indian markets? They aren't just doing that. This map tells you all the ports, all the markets, and names of places that appear in the body of nearly 7,000 textile tickets. I've mapped all of that out. And it's incredible because you pull out a textile ticket destined for Bangkok, and the imagery on it is Bangkok specific. You take a textile ticket that is destined for Baghdad, for Afghanistan, for Myanmar. Somehow, a network of merchants, of artists, of agents, of illustrators are paying very close attention to the visual culture, to the likes and the dislikes and the interests of their consumer base. They're taking all of this information, transmitting it back into the studios of Manchester, where printing houses are ready with an array of images to show to a prospective trader and say, you want to sell in Cambodia? Guess what? I have the perfect image to appeal to your customer in Cambodia. Oh, sorry, you want to sell in Burma? No problem. I have Burmese scenes. You want to sell in Afghanistan? Why don't you try the Amir of Afghanistan? And so on. So it's quite interesting to see that. I mean, you think of advertisement today, and how we talk about targeted advertisement, you talk about market studies, you talk about, you look at algorithmic advertisements you receive, you look at the themes that run through the advertisements you receive today. And interestingly, you will find strands of all of that even here in some of the earliest advertisements that were circulating in the region. And they simply speak to how important images are and how much images can tell us about time and place, and how little slips of paper aren't simply beautiful. They hold so much meaning if we only took the time to study them and read about them and wonder about where these images sort of take birth. And with that, I would like to close. Thank you very much. And over to you.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So many ideas, although I was aware of Shipper's Ticket, so many ideas that I hadn't considered. And we have a few questions, if you don't mind. I hope that's possible. I'm very interested in the accuracy. You mentioned that these illustrations were produced in Manchester, presumably by artists who weren't familiar with Hindu mythology. And is it just by copying they avoided cultural errors from creeping in? Have you seen any tickets and you think, that's not quite right? Or
Yes, we do. We see a lot of it actually. For example, in certain tickets, the face of the gods are more rounded and cherub-like. Sometimes the arms are wrong, or sometimes the things they hold in their hands are
yes,
wrong, and sometimes contexts are misunderstood. For example, a very interesting example is actually one that a different scholar pointed out to me. It's a ticket that shows a very interesting scene from the Mahabharata, which is a it shows the rape of Draupadi. It's a very popularly known incident, and it shows how she is disrobed in the court after her husband loses a gambling game. Now, such an image, um, we understand its contexts are not positive. It's the context is not playful. It is not nice. It's not a harmless disrobing, but it in fact almost triggers. I think it's one of the triggers for the Great Mahabharat War. But the fact that it is used as a textile ticket throws up a question about whether it was misunderstood, because an Indian trader, we surmise, wouldn't use such an image to sell cloth, especially. Because their audiences wouldn't read it as a positive event. You also see a lot of course, mistaken representations, wrong names written, and so on. But it's not at all uncommon. We know that, I mean, I showed you a few tickets that are direct copies, but we have many more. There is definitely some system in place that allows them to access original material, that they have to be terribly skilled to convert into these very faithful chromolithographs. Yes.
very, very interesting. The next question is, indigenous mills also, I think, used shippers tickets. Were these produced in India, and were they mimicking the tickets that were produced in Manchester, or was the same trademark regulations in place in India?
The same trademark regulations were placed in India, were in place in India, because it was all empire. If you were a trader and you had to work in empire, you needed to follow the empire's laws. Number one. Number two, in order to apply for a trademark, you had to actually write to the Manchester and later the London office. So it was all mail. You had to write to them. And since you knew there was a printing industry there, I mean, we worked a lot with the archives of B. Taylor & Co., which is this printing establishment. And we see a lot of correspondence with Indian merchants and agents where they're requesting specific imagery and they're asking them, follow up, send my design in, here's the design I choose, let me know, and so on. But to your question about whether tickets were printed in India, yes. We know that at some point, a few tickets began to be produced in India. It's very difficult to tell. It's not entirely, we're not entirely sure which ones, but we definitely know that some began to be produced in India, yes. But there is a marked difference in the quality of the register. And by register, I mean how precisely colors and lines are overlaid, which entirely depends on how precisely the plates are overlaid on each other. Because the more precise the layering of plates and colors, the more accurate the image you get. Otherwise, it's sort of blurry and shaky.
Very last question. How did shippers' tickets die out? Was that because of independence, or did it die out for some other reason? Or
it's a wonderful question, and one we haven't been able to find an answer to. We know that there was a peak period Most certainly, there was a peak period, and we know that they were being produced until the late 1920s at least. We know that much for sure. And we're not entirely sure why and how they died out. Um, I This is conjecture on my part, but I feel that, and I think from some of the images in the archive, what we do see is that they stopped making these very elaborate images and they started using one recognizable symbol, which sort of got abbreviated and abbreviated and more abbreviated and ended up becoming just a very, very small symbol that was then produced in smaller sizes. We have quite a few of the smaller sized ones.
Sorry, to just add to Shrey's point, the British textile industry itself went into a very sharp decline after the Second World War, which kind of affected their export trade quite drastically. And it's interesting that in a study of some of the advertisements issued by ticket printers, while the Second World War was on, some printers were already issuing advertisements saying, well, the war's going to end and our global markets are going to be open again. So why don't you get a head start on getting your tickets printed for these? But it was definitely an industrial decline that influenced also the decline of shippers' tickets.
And perhaps the rise of Gandhi.
You see Gandhi on the textile tickets, interestingly. You see Gandhi's spinning wheel on the I think, Rashna, will you show them the we don't have the presentation on, but you see the spinning wheel that Gandhi advocates,
Yes, yes.
which becomes
Yeah,
such a
I
big
think
part of the
that's there in
Swadeshi
the
movement.
presentation.
It
Let me
was in the
just pull that up.
presentation.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
That appears on textile tickets too. In fact, a lot of the handloom revivalists who are actively part of the don't, I mean, I'm glad you brought up Swadeshi actually, because you're right. By the 1920s, cloth becomes a rallying point um, in the great nationalist movement, because Gandhi says, a lot of your opposition of the empire should also stem from rejecting empire's goods and empire's products, and number one amongst them is cloth. And that's why Gandhi starts the spin your own cloth, and the spinning wheel acquires so much significance. But what happens is that those symbols end up being used by textile tickets as well, and the champions of handloom, women champions especially of handloom, who advocate that you wear only handloom, they become interestingly symbols on textile tickets.
Thank you very much. I saw a hand raised for a moment in our audience. Did someone have a question? I don't see anything in the chat. No? Well, I will say thank you so much. Ashna, can you share your screen again? If our presentation has whetted your appetite for shippers' tickets, I must say I am completely fascinated by them. We will visit the Map Museum in Bengaluru and visit its collection as part of the Selvedge Textile Tour of India, which takes place next year from February the 11th to March the 28th. You can find out more on our website. And if you are, next slide, please, Ashna. And if you are interested in joining more of our online talks this week, they run every day until Saturday, always at 6 p.m. every day. We have a talk about the history of English crewel work, the Japanese kimono, and several presentations about sustainable textile production. Next slide, please. We could, of course, talk about textile tickets all day, but unfortunately, our time has come to an end. I would like to say a special thank you to you, our speakers, for presenting such an inspiring and interesting subject. Thank you to Shrey and Rashna, and to the wider MAP Academy team for sharing your passion and research, and to Ashna and Lauren and James from the Selvedge team, who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to organise this event and to ensure it ran smoothly. And to all of you in our audience for joining us today. We will see you next time. Thank you all very much.